America is at a breaking point, but you wouldn't know it if you just watched the news. The biggest threats we face aren't discussed on cable television. Instead, we get endless distractions, politicians arguing over nonsense, journalists pushing the latest social agenda, and celebrities lecturing us on things they don't understand. But the real question is this: what is actually happening to our country? President Donald Trump has sounded the alarm. Nuclear war is no longer a Cold War relic or a distant threat. It's a real and growing danger. Trump recently said, if nuclear weapons are used, it will probably be the end of the world. That's not hyperbole. That's the sitting president of the United States warning that we are closer than ever to global catastrophe. Yet Washington isn't talking about it. The mainstream media is silent. They want you to worry about the climate, your pronouns, or whatever social issue is trending today, but not about the fact that entire cities could be erased in an instant. Ask yourself this. Why aren't they talking about it? If nuclear war is the greatest existential threat to humanity, why isn't the #1 issue in America? Why is it that every time Trump brings it up, he's mocked, ignored, or dismissed? Are they hoping you don't notice? Or worse, do they think you don't care? And it's not just nuclear war. Let's talk about money. Because at the end of the day, that's what Washington really cares about. The war in Ukraine has been dragging on for more than 3 years. And in that time, America has sent $350 billion overseas. Let's put that into perspective. That's 3 times more than Europe has contributed. Why? Why is it that American taxpayers, our veterans, our workers, our retirees, are footing the bill for a war thousands of miles away while European nations, who are directly affected, are paying a fraction of what we are? The answer is simple: because Washington doesn't work for you. The people running this country believe they can spend your money however they want, without consequence. They assume you won't ask questions. But today we're asking them, where is this money actually going? Who is profiting from this war? Who benefits while Americans struggle with record high inflation, rising energy prices, and an economy that feels more unstable by the day? And while we're asking questions, let's go back to the one no one in Washington will touch. What happens if this escalates? We're being told to believe that this war is just another foreign conflict, that it has nothing to do with us. But what if that's a lie? What if this isn't just a proxy war, but the beginning of something much worse? Trump has made it clear. America is on a dangerous path, and nuclear war is no longer unthinkable. Yet instead of discussing solutions, Washington wants you distracted. So let's cut through the nonsense. Let's look at the facts. Because the American people deserve the truth. Take a step back and consider where we are today. Just a few years ago, the idea of a major war in Europe seemed impossible. A full-scale conflict between Russia and Ukraine? Unthinkable. The Middle East spiraling out of control? Implausible. China openly preparing for war? Far-fetched. That's what they told us. That's what the so-called experts confidently declared on television. Yet here we are. The world we once knew is gone. Ukraine has been at war for over 3 years. The Middle East remains in chaos. Iran continues to grow stronger, funding terrorist organizations and accelerating its nuclear ambitions. China flexes its military muscle, conducting war games that look increasingly like rehearsals for an invasion of Taiwan. Meanwhile, during the Biden administration, America became weaker, more divided, and less respected than at any point in modern history. But let's ask the real question. Why did this happen? Why, during Trump's first presidency, did none of these threats escalate as they have now? Why did Russia wait until after Biden took office to invade Ukraine? Why did Iran hold back during Trump's years, only to ramp up aggression afterward? Why did China stay relatively quiet when Trump was in charge, but suddenly become more assertive the moment he left? Some might dismiss this as coincidence, but it's not. It's cause and effect. Weakness invites aggression. For 4 years, Washington projected weakness. The botched Afghanistan withdrawal was a humiliation for America on the global stage. It signaled to our adversaries that we lacked strategy, leadership, and the will to fight. The response to Russia's invasion of Ukraine? Disorganized, hesitant, full of empty threats and ineffective sanctions. The approach to China? A confusing mix of appeasement and tough talk that no one took seriously. Now, America is playing defense, trying to clean up a mess that could have been avoided. Let's be honest. Washington doesn't care about the consequences. The people making these decisions, the politicians, bureaucrats, and defense contractors, are not the ones suffering. It's American families who are paying the price. It's your tax dollars funding endless wars. It's your cost of living that keeps rising. It's your retirement savings that are worth less every year. And here's the worst part. We are being misled constantly. When this all began, they told us the war in Ukraine would be quick. They said if we just sent enough weapons, Ukraine would push Russia back, and everything would return to normal. That didn't happen. Then they said if we just sent more money, just a little more, Ukraine could win. That didn't happen either. Then they claimed Russia was on the brink of collapse, that Putin's government was about to fall. That didn't happen. Oh, what's the latest claim? That this war is necessary for democracy? That we're fighting for freedom? That sending another $50 billion will finally turn the tide? That America's financial support has no limits, and we should keep paying indefinitely? The truth is, no one in Washington knows how to end this war. No one has a strategy. No one has a plan. Because the people in charge don't want it to end. War is too profitable. Arms manufacturers, consultants, and lobbyists are getting rich while the American people struggle. That's why Washington keeps writing blank checks. That's why no one is asking real questions. But we are. And the first question is simple. How much longer will Americans tolerate this? When this conflict began, Americans were assured it would be a limited effort. A few $1 billion here, a few billion there, just enough to help Ukraine defend itself. But fast forward 3 years, and the United States has already spent over $350 billion on this war. More than 3 times what all of Europe has contributed combined. Let that sink in. The countries directly impacted by the conflict, the ones with the most at stake if Russia advances further west, are contributing far less than we are. Why is that? The answer isn't complicated. Washington doesn't work for you. It works for defense contractors, lobbyists, and the permanent bureaucracy that profits from endless spending. They don't care how much it costs because it's not their money, it's yours. They don't care how long it lasts because they aren't the ones being sent to the front lines. And they don't care if Ukraine actually wins because victory isn't the goal. The goal is to keep the money flowing. Let's break it down. Where has that $350 billion gone? A significant portion went to weapons manufacturers, the companies that build tanks, missiles, drones, and ammunition. These corporations are raking in record profits while your grocery bills keep rising. Another massive chunk went to the Ukrainian government itself, covering everything from military salaries to social programs. Yes, you heard that right. Your tax dollars are funding pensions and welfare programs in a foreign country while millions of Americans struggle to make ends meet. But that's just the tip of the iceberg. The Biden administration claimed every dollar was carefully monitored, that there was no corruption, no waste, no misuse of funds. But let's be honest. Is that believable? Ukraine has long been ranked as one of the most corrupt countries in Europe. Even before the war, its economy was plagued by fraud and mismanagement. Now, with hundreds of billions of untraceable American dollars flowing through its system, are we really supposed to believe that every cent is being used properly? Let's listen to what real Americans are saying. Because while Washington might ignore these questions, the American people are not. We've gathered feedback from everyday citizens who are frustrated with the current situation. Here's what they're asking. Why are we paying for Ukraine's government to function when our own government is failing us? I support Ukraine, but this is getting out of hand. How much is too much? We spent $350 billion and Ukraine is still losing ground. Where did all that money go? These are valid questions, and they deserve real answers. But instead of transparency, Washington's response is more spending, more secrecy, and more demands for Americans to stay quiet and keep paying. And here's the biggest question of all. How does this end? Right now, there's no exit strategy. No one in Washington is talking about negotiations. No one is explaining what victory looks like. No one is telling the American people what our end goal actually is. That's because, for them, there is no end goal. This war is a business. And in Washington, business is booming. For decades, Americans were reassured that nuclear war was a relic of the past. The Cold War ended, and with it, the fear of global annihilation seemed to fade. Nuclear weapons, we were told, were merely deterrents, tools locked away in silos, never to be used. But is that really true? Today, the threat of nuclear conflict is higher than at any point since the Cuban Missile Crisis. And yet, our leaders act as if it doesn't exist. Let's examine the facts. Russia possesses one of the largest nuclear arsenals in the world. China is rapidly expanding its capabilities, with estimates suggesting it could have 1,500 nuclear warheads by 2035. Iran continues to pursue nuclear technology, despite international efforts to curb its ambitions. These nations aren't just stockpiling weapons. They're actively testing delivery systems, strengthening alliances, and preparing for potential conflicts. Meanwhile, Washington focuses on domestic debates, leaving critical questions about nuclear strategy unanswered. Take Russia, for example. Its military doctrine now includes the possibility of using tactical nuclear weapons under certain conditions. Just a few years ago, Russian officials claimed they would only consider such measures if their own borders were directly threatened. Today, however, those red lines are shifting. What happens if NATO crosses one of these perceived boundaries? Will Russia follow through on its threats? The risk grows with every escalation, every shipment of weapons, every round of sanctions. China's actions are equally concerning. Beijing is not only increasing its nuclear arsenal, but also developing advanced technologies like hypersonic missiles. These weapons can evade traditional defense systems, making them even more dangerous. Why is China investing so heavily in nuclear capabilities? Analysts suggest it's preparing for a potential conflict over Taiwan, a scenario that could draw the United States into a direct confrontation. If that happens, will America's current defenses be enough? Then there's Iran. For years, this country has been a destabilizing force in the Middle East, funding terrorist groups and opposing U.S. interests. Under President Trump, Iran's nuclear ambitions were temporarily curtailed. However, subsequent policy decisions have allowed Tehran to make significant progress toward obtaining nuclear capabilities. If Iran succeeds, the balance of power in the region could shift dramatically. Imagine a world where multiple rogue states possess nuclear weapons. This isn't paranoia, it's a plausible outcome based on current trends. But here's the most pressing question. What happens when the first nuclear weapon is used in combat? Once Pandora's box is opened, there's no closing it. A single strike could trigger a chain reaction, escalating into a full-scale nuclear exchange. The consequences would be catastrophic, not just for the countries involved, but for humanity itself. Despite this reality, our leaders seem unprepared. The Biden administration focused heavily on climate change, while largely ignoring nuclear strategy. When former President Trump raises concerns about the issue, he's often mocked or dismissed. Yet his warnings deserve serious consideration. After all, if even one nuclear weapon is detonated, the impact will be felt worldwide. What are real Americans saying about this? Many are deeply concerned. Here's a sample of their thoughts. Speech balloon: people don't realize that nuclear war isn't just an explosion, it's the end of civilization. Speech balloon: they keep telling us it won't happen, but why should we trust them? Speech balloon: the next world war won't involve tanks, it'll involve missiles. And no one seems to care. These comments reflect a growing unease among the public. While Washington pretends everything is fine, ordinary citizens are paying attention. They understand the stakes and are demanding answers. Is America ready for what's coming? Based on current policies, it's hard to say yes. Our leaders aren't acting with the urgency this issue requires, and that should concern everyone. For years, the American public has been misled, not just about Ukraine, not just about nuclear threats, but about nearly every major issue affecting our nation. Washington doesn't just control policies, it controls the flow of information. And the corporate media? They're not watchdogs protecting democracy. Instead, they become tools of propaganda, trained to shield the establishment and silence anyone who challenges the official narrative. Consider how this works in practice. A few years ago, if you suggested that the U.S. government was preparing for a prolonged conflict in Ukraine, you'd have been labeled a conspiracy theorist. If you pointed out that NATO's expansion might provoke Russia, you'd have been dismissed as an apologist for Putin. And if you questioned why we were spending billions on foreign wars while Americans struggled at home, you'd have been accused of being against freedom or democracy. But now, the truth is becoming harder to ignore. This war isn't about freedom, it's about power. It's about money. It's about keeping the public distracted while Washington does whatever it wants. The media's role is simple. Ensure no one asks the hard questions. Let's examine their tactics. When former President Trump raises concerns about the real risks of nuclear war, how does the media respond? Do they engage in thoughtful discussions? Do they invite experts to debate America's nuclear strategy? No. Instead, they roll their eyes. They label him reckless. They claim he's fear-mongering. To them, the real danger isn't nuclear war. It's losing control of the narrative. The same pattern applies to coverage of Ukraine. Every time a new aid package is announced, the media hails it as a victory for democracy. But do they ever ask where the money is going? Do they investigate how much of it is wasted, stolen, or misused? Of course not. Their job isn't to inform you. It's to sell you a story crafted by those in power. And here's the most troubling part. They assume you won't notice. They believe that if they repeat the same talking points often enough, you'll accept them without question. They think that by ignoring inconvenient truths, you'll forget about them entirely. They rely on distractions, culture wars, social issues, and partisan bickering to keep you from asking, who's really running this country? And what are they doing with our resources? But here's the good news. More Americans are starting to see through the lies. People are waking up to the reality that the media doesn't serve the public, it serves the elite. And once you understand that, you can't unsee it. What can we do? Stay informed. Challenge the narratives. Speak up when something doesn't add up. Because the truth matters, and the future of our country depends on it. America stands at a critical juncture. The decisions made in the coming months and years will shape not only our nation's future, but also the future of the world. Will we continue funding a war with no clear end? Will we keep ignoring the growing nuclear threat until it's too late? Will we allow Washington to spend taxpayer money without accountability? These are the questions every American should be asking. The reality is stark. There is no clear plan. No one in Washington can define what victory in Ukraine actually means. No one can explain how this war will conclude. Instead of focusing on de-escalation or negotiations, the default strategy seems to be more spending, more weapons, and deeper involvement. Without a coherent plan, the result is predictable: endless conflict. Meanwhile, our adversaries are preparing for the long haul. Russia, for example, isn't rushing for a quick win. It's playing a strategic game, knowing that time is on its side. They understand that Western nations may lose patience before they do. And China? Beijing is watching closely, learning from the situation in Ukraine. They're studying America's weaknesses, testing our resolve, and planning accordingly. Every misstep by Washington strengthens their position. The Biden administration left America weaker than ever. Inflation soared, energy prices skyrocketed, and our military was stretched thin while borders remained porous. But now, with former President Trump back in the spotlight, the establishment seems uneasy. Why? Because he's challenging the status quo. He's questioning the war. He's demanding transparency about where our resources are going and who benefits from them. And the louder he speaks, the harder the media works to silence him. But here's the question every citizen should ask. What happens if nothing changes? What if we keep sending billions overseas to fight a war we can't win? What if we ignore the nuclear threat while our rivals grow stronger? What if we let the media dictate the conversation while Washington leads us down a dangerous path? At some point, reality catches up. We can either wake up now or face the consequences later. The choice is ours. So what does this leave us? What can you do? The answer is simple. Stay informed. Ask questions. Demand transparency. The establishment thrives on distraction. They want you focused on trivial debates while they make critical decisions behind closed doors. Don't let them. Pay attention to the issues that matter. Challenge the narratives being pushed by those in power. Speak up when something doesn't add up. Most importantly, hold leaders accountable. Politicians, journalists, and so-called experts, they all work for you. Their job is to serve the public, not the other way around. If you agree with this message, share it. If you disagree, join the conversation. Leave your thoughts in the comments below because dialogue is how change begins. And if you want to stay updated on these important topics, subscribe. The fight for America's future is just beginning, and your voice matters. Together, we can ensure that truth prevails.